All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the stream. So I'm David, and for the last couple of weeks, we've been working on a Twitter clone in Rust, and we're going to continue doing that today. Over the sort of, I feel like 6 or 7 weeks, we've been building out most of the backend for our app. And over the last couple of streams, we've started to dive into the front end. And I think most of the prep work is actually done today, that we can sort of go all in on the front end today, which is very exciting. So there isn't really a whole lot to show for the app yet. We have some basic navigation going. The URL actually changes. That was not trivial to get working. You can hit the back and forward buttons and stuff like that. So this is basically what we have so far. And yeah, so I want to say before we dive in, for the last 2 streams, I've had some issues with my internet where it's died after 2 hours of streaming. It usually comes back after a few minutes. So if the stream suddenly cuts out, it will probably come back. I'm also recording this time in OBS, so I don't have to download the recording afterwards from Twitch, which is nice. So you can always watch the recording back on YouTube later. There's the link down below if you're interested. So yeah, I think we should basically get started. So this is the code for the front end. We're using a WebAssembly framework called Seed. It works a little bit like Elm, if you're familiar with that, where there's a model and sort of a view update sort of cycle. And I actually don't remember how far we got with the login flow. I think that's where we have to start. Let's see. So you can, do we have any users? We do. Let's see if we can actually log in. Let's actually look at the code first. View. I increased the font size a little bit from the last couple of streams. There's some people who's been asking about that, so let me know if it's looking good. And if you have any questions along the way, just put them in chat. So you can log in. It sends login form submitted, which we don't handle. There should be sign up as well. That sends this event, which we do handle. Let's see. Grab the form, grab the inputs. Then we perform a create user command. Yeah, I believe last time we sort of got started on actually making requests to the backend through, so we have a shared library. Since both the backend and the front ends in Rust, we're actually able to share types between the two, which is kind of neat. And so we set up basically types for each endpoint, so that we can sort of have a type safe way to call an endpoint and know exactly what data we're going to get back. And that is sort of safe between the backend and the front end, so that should not get out of sync, which is nice. So that's what we did last time. We only did it for a few endpoints. I promised I was going to do the rest off stream, convert them from the current setup that we have now into this type safe setup, but I haven't had time to do that. So I was thinking we could just basically do them as we get to them today. So let's just actually see what works. So the create user calls /users, gets back a token, sends the create user endpoint responded event that gets the token, and then it reloads the current user. So we probably have to save the token somehow, save it in local storage or a cookie or something like that, so we can actually retrieve it later. Reloading user seems to work as well. Let's see. In our view, do we actually handle if you're logged in or not? view page. I don't think we ever set the page. So here when we get a response from the create user endpoint, we should probably change what page you're on. I'm thinking we should do that first so we can actually validate that signing up works. Let's go ahead and delete the user first. Whoops. Users. Is that how you do it? Yeah. We had follows as well. Who was following anybody? That might be a bug that we have to look into. Are we missing a foreign key between the No, this references means that I wonder if whatever, we'll look into that later. So when we get a response from the form, we say model. Let's go ahead and make a new page quickly. Sorry, let's just call it signed in. That. So this is the URL that'll be shown in the URL bar, I believe, of the browser. In view. I think that works. Yeah. All right. So now we can say model.page is page signed in. So now when we create a user, we should see signed in on the page. Let's try. Sign up, Bob. We can't actually hit enter yet to submit the form. We have to remember to fix that. And there we go, signed in. Of course, if I reload the page, we're signed out again. That kind of sucks. Let's do login. Doesn't work because it's not even hooked up. So my Vim has this super weird thing because of some plugin that I have installed, where sometimes if I quit a window, like you can see down here, it's like it moved everything in the window like up one line, and everything is like out of sync with the rendering, if that makes sense. And usually, like if you go up and down a few times, like redraw the entire screen, then it's back to normal. Sometimes you have to restart Vim. That's super annoying. I have to figure out what exactly that is. All right, let's do login. So that is pretty similar to the signing in. We get the login form. And then we perform the login command. That's this one. We don't even have that yet. Should be similar to create user. Takes a username and a password. Have to look in the backend what it actually looks like. So you log in by calling post to username session. Username. Post. What do you actually have to post? You have to post a login payload. What does that take? That just takes the password because we have the username in the URL. And what does it return? So this is one of the endpoints that we have to update to this type safe endpoint version thing that we built last time. It returns a token response like that. That makes sense. And then let's say we respond with login endpoint responded. And that will work very similarly to the create user. In that it contains a token. Then we set the token, reload the current user, and then we say you're signed in. I think that was it. And there we go. And it correctly shows the username up there. Did it do that on the sign in as well? Or sign up rather? I think so. Because this time we didn't have any follows at all, but it still said it truncated the table. I guess that means it truncates the table whether there are any associations or not. Makes sense. Do that. If you sign in. Yeah, it does update as well. Great. So that works. Now we just have to actually save the fact that you're logged in. And I think once we have that down, we can actually start to build out more infrastructure. So I wonder if Seed has any local storage stuff. Now, I'm not going to spend super long time on security, mainly because I'm not quite sure how to do it, so I would have to research. I think for now we're just going to save the authentication token in local storage. I have no idea if that's actually the way that you would do it. You probably wouldn't. You'd probably encrypt it somehow, but that gets very complicated very quickly, I'm afraid. And I would rather get to actually building the website rather than spending lots of time on web security. Local storage. Web storage. What the hell? That's funny. Get a native storage instance. This method used internally by other methods. If you need to call it often, please create an issue. There's an error if you cannot get access to the storage. Security error. Spouses do not have a given storage. User denied access for current origin, etc. Get item. Storage. How do you get a local storage? I guess you don't have to. Let's say we want a mod storage. We probably need to import this guy. Probably web storage as well. And how do we actually want to save stuff? Do we just want to save it? Do we want to have individual functions for the things that we want to save? Let's try that first. Set auth token string. Get insert. So you should be able to say storage insert. It's an associated function. The key is like that. The T is something serialized. All right. We're probably going to have to like figure out error handling at some point. Let's try from init just to say storage set auth token to be foo and get auth token and log it. This one should probably return option. Returns error if we cannot get access to storage or find the key or deserialize the value. Web storage error. Get key error, key not found error. Can you look at the implementation for local storage and see when it returns which one? Map error, get storage error, source not found. Not really. It just returns a storage. Website storage. How does that get mapped? Whatever. I think we were able to check if the key was there. Web storage. Key. Nope. Returns the key of the given position with an index. All right, so I guess we do actually have to match on the result. So the error can be any one of these. Oops. Ah, come on. No, that didn't work. I was trying to record a macro to like fix all of them. So QQ, beginning of line, go to parenthesis, change inner word, arrow, like that. Get storage error. There's no documentation for what each variant means. Let's just say get key error. Key not found. That's probably the one that returns none. And for all others, let's just panic now. And let's say go to macro, go to the beginning of the line, word, yank inner word, find comma, paste, add quotes, go down. Whatever. Whoops. All right, so now if there's something else that fails, we'll at least know which one it was. Let's make sure that we actually get a none. So if we don't set the token and then we try to get it, that one should log a none value. I think you need to use the storage function to get the global local storage. No, I don't think so. I think there is only really one local storage. I'm honestly not sure. I noticed that the local storage was like doesn't have any fields. So like the just local storage in itself is an instance of local storage, if that makes sense. And like none of these actually takes a self. So like you can't pass in a local storage here. You just have to have a thing that implements web storage, and then on that you can call like insert directly. So like directly on the type, if that makes sense. We're gonna see right now if it totally breaks. Hey, it returns none. Great. So now it should return some with foo. It does. If we uncomment that, it's still there. Great. That's a weird API. Yeah, sort of. I mean, there is only one local storage on the browser, as far as I'm aware. Yeah. Cool. So that works. I believe you can say local storage dot clear. We should probably have a method to remove the key again. Remove auth token. Like that. Let's just put the key in a constant. Auth token key. And error handling is probably a thing that we would want to work on. I kind of want to have a list of just like miscellaneous error handling to do, of like to-dos that we want to work on. Front end things to work on. Front end. Front end to-dos. I don't know. Like what I imagine is that we have some sort of general way to like raise or throw an error, and that'll be caught somewhere, and then we'll send a message that'll like cause a sort of URL, like a special UI element to be shown on top of the page, like that something went wrong or something like that. And that'll also like log it and do all that stuff. I don't really think we have to get into that now just to get things working, but it is something that we have to look into later. All right, so now whenever we get an auth token, we also want to save it. And we currently do that in 2 places. So that should probably be in a method on the model. We could also make it just a function that takes the model, and then that goes in a module somewhere. Because you can very quickly imagine that the model is going to accumulate a lot of behavior and just become sort of a God object in that sense. I'm not necessarily sure that's a bad thing in this case, because you could always just call the function. I think let's go with just adding it to the model for now, and then we can see if that breaks down for us later. What do we call the method? I kind of want to have it do both of these things. Nah. Do we ever want to set the auth token without reloading the current user? Possibly. Let's say set auth token. Mute self. And then we wanted to do, whoops. Storage, set auth token. And then here we say model set auth token. And we do the same thing here. Now you could technically argue that this token is a string, and then we turn it into a string slice, only to turn it back into a string right here. I mean, sure, we might be allocating a couple of too many strings. I don't think that's a huge deal to worry about. And generally, passing around string slices is easier than strings. So I think we're going to keep it this way for now. So that actually sets the token. Let's see. So that one comes back with the current user, which we still want. The question is, do we want to save it? I don't think we'd want to save the current user between, like if you close the app and open again, we'd probably want to reload the current user from that point. Which means that we probably want to have like one function that we can use to call to reload the current user. Does that go on the model as well? All right, let's just get it working for now. So when you call init, auth token is none, so that should be storage get auth token. So if there is a token, we want to load the current user. All right. I think that should work. We have our user. Yep. We're logged in. The auth token is there. We're still on the login page, so that URL didn't change. I'm just going to write that down quickly. So now if I go to slash, I'm still logged in. Sweet. Let's just remove that logging thing. Great. So now we just need a log out thing. And that gets a click handler. How the hell did that work for links? Just like that. But now it doesn't have a link. I wonder if you can say, because it has to have an href in order to actually appear as a link. I wonder what happens if you do that. We have to add the logout message, and we have to handle it. That needs to be an arrow. It does work. Let's just add a log so we can see that it actually happens. And it does. Sweet. So how do we actually log out? Well, we definitely need to set the page to page root, I guess. We need to unset the auth token. Like that. We need to remove the current user. That should probably be done in here. Oops, down here. Nothing else, I believe. Nice. All right, I think that actually works. Let's just see how we can fix the fact that it stays on the login page. So after you login endpoint responded, we change the page. But we don't change the URL. I think actually this way of navigating won't work because it doesn't change. Yeah, it doesn't change the URL. I think we have to send a URL changed message. And that should get picked up by seed automatically. Let's give it a shot. I think there's some magic to the fact that like this URL changed type is built into seed. So I think it'll automatically watch for those and change the URL accordingly. Subscribe to URL changes. I'm honestly not sure. What can we do with this orders thing? Can we use it to send messages? I do think so. Send message. So after the login endpoint responds, we want to say orders send message, and we want to send a message URL changed with subs URL changed URL. That takes a seed URL. How do you make one of these? URL new set path. Some iterator of things that can be turned into strings. Implements deserialize. Debug. It implements from stir. How does that work? New with base. URL from. I think that's the one that we want. That means we should be able to say parse into URL. Unwrap. So anything that implements from stir, you can call .parse on to parse it into that type. Let's see if we do this. If we do this from we don't really have, let's just try it. I was wondering if we had a button somewhere that we could try to click on to see if it actually worked, but I don't think we have a button anywhere. I think we only have links, and they have the href attribute that automatically gets turned into these messages. All right, let's just see if this works. Log out. Nope, that blew up. Great. Not yet implemented. Is that this one? It's doing the weird rendering thing again. I think it might be because there's like a hash mark at the end there. Yeah, that's the one. Let's try and log it. We do actually log in, so that's something. Well, that's because we do actually manage to set the auth token before we send the event, so that makes sense. Unknown URL / signed in. Well, that makes sense. It still didn't change. So I don't think this is how we want to do it. I wonder, how are you then supposed to be changing URLs? Go and load. trigger page reload. Go back, go forward. Add path part. Do we have to build our own URL and then call this go to unload thing? There is the, I do believe there is the history API that we can use to set the URL bar. URL history, push state. Push state with URL, replace state. This seems like oddly low level, so I don't think that's the way. I do remember there was just like a function that you could call to set the URL or something. What was it? URL request. URL changed. Base URL. What is the history API called that you use? Dot push state. Routing push route. Add a new route using history's push state method. That might be the one. So the route is something that can be turned into a URL. What does URL implement from for? Only references or requests. So I guess we have to do the business that we had before to actually make the URL, and then call this guy to set it. Log out, log in as Bob. And that did it, it changed. If you hit the back button, you go to log in, which doesn't quite make sense, but we are in fact still logged in. Now, if you go to log in while you're logged in, you should probably get redirected somewhere. I'll write that down. Going to /login while logged in should send you somewhere else. Nice. Do we want to, we should probably package that up into a thing. All we need is the model. We could make it a function on the page itself to be like go to or just go. And that needs to take ownership. And then we should be able to say page, signed in, go with the model. Like that, because model is already a mutable reference. Very nice. Do the same thing here after the signup flow. Loading profile, no. Logging out, yep. We want to say page root go model. You could also make the argument that it should be the other way around, that you should be able to say like model.go to page root. I personally don't think there's any huge advantage to doing it one way or the other, so we'll just stick with this way for now. It might also be bad that like you're passing in the model here only to make a change to it. Maybe the model should be making that change itself. Personally, I'm not too scared about that because Rust will protect us from like these kinds of race conditions, so I think it's fine. Let's see. I think that was basically it. Let's see. If we log out, we're logged out. If we log in, let's delete all the users. Sign up as Bob. URL changes, we're now logged in. Get our profile, log out. We're back at the root. Log in. Great. Yeah. All right, I think what I would like to do next is get all these updated to the type safe structure that we had before. Which I actually thought we did already. Oh my god, why does it keep doing that? Let's do it for one that we have already. Log in, reload current user /me. I think we should do it for /me, so convert that to use the like shared types. But we haven't converted, so if we look in the backend, we haven't converted the me endpoint yet down here. So we're going to be converting it to something like this. So let's just do that quickly now. We need a couple of things. We need a struct that represents the endpoint itself. Let's call it me. We need a struct that represents the URL. The URL is the URL spec, so that's the guy that goes in here on the backend. And then the actual URL with all the data inside it for the front end to use. That's just the same. The URL for me is me URL. The method is get. And it returns, I do believe we have a no payload. And the response is also no payload. Well, no, the response is a user response. Like that. That does compile. So then we have a trait called, if we look at let's see, endpoint users, we have this get user. So we have a trait called API backend endpoint, which basically does all this stuff that was in the old handler. So when we register /me, we have an endpoint at me get, which is this one. It basically authenticates and returns the user. So we just have to stick that into an implementation of the backend endpoint for me. All this is stuff that we built during the last stream. So if I'm going over it a bit quickly, you can rewatch the stream from last week to learn all about it. The endpoint is a user response. It takes no payload. We have to import a whole bunch of things. As well, we need async trait. And me. No payload. User response. Status code. Like that. We should have tests that we should be able to run. Everything seems to be working. Nice. So at least we didn't break anything. That's great. So now over here, we should be able to actually reuse that. So how did we do that? Shared lib. So we made this function called fetch. So we want to say fetch takes a type, takes a me. It's an async function, so it has to be awaited. It takes an auth token, that is some auth token. It takes a URL, which is just me URL. It takes a payload, which should be no payload. And then it takes a function from response to message. I believe that's just me loaded. That actually compiles. That's always good. I wonder if we can leave off this type here. Nah, it needs to know. All right. Cool. So we should be able to load the current user, and we totally are. That's sweet. What was I working on before? Right, I think it would be, I think we might as well convert these as well. Let's just do that. So we have login. That returns that goes to users, username, session, I believe is post. It returns a token response and takes a login payload. And the complete URL takes, this is login URL, takes a username. Like that. Now we should be able to call it here in a similar way. So fetch login. It doesn't take an auth token. It would be nice. Can we make that a... I was wondering if we could make it a type parameter if the endpoint takes an auth token or not. But most endpoints do, so I'm not really sure if there's a whole lot of value in doing that. Login URL with username. Payload is login payload with password. And the message is login endpoint responded. That gets just a string, which is the token. Did I mix it up? So it's a URL, that is correct. Payload. Expected me URL. Login is login URL. Set request payload is not implemented for login payload. So this was a small annoyance that we had in our API. We basically have this generic system for defining URLs, but we need a way to add data that's specific to the front end and specific to the back end. But you can imagine that if we were to add like how to set data on a request in the front end, if we had that in the shared library, that meant that the shared library would depend on Seed, the front end framework. And since the backend depends on the shared library, then the backend would transitively also depend on Seed, which we can't have. So we have these sort of extension traits that augment our system with additional behavior that's specific to the front end or the backend. And one of them is how do we set the request data for the payloads. And currently we're implementing this set request payload for each payload separately. I'm wondering if we can just do it for anything that implements serialize. Let's try that. For T serialize. Serialize. Nah, that's conflicting because no payload. Yeah, you can't both have an implementation of a trait. You can't have it like that because like that's an overlapping impl, right? This would require a specialization, I believe, to actually make work, which is annoying. And we cannot remove the no payload thing because we actually need it here. So we actually almost have to do this, like duplicate the definition. Login URL is private. That needs to be public. All right, so things are back to compiling now. Let's just test that everything still works. So that was login that we changed. So we log out and log in. Great, still works. So we can nuke all this code. A part of me just want to make a macro to make these definitions. I'm not sure if there is another way to do it without specialization. I think. Let's make a macro. Macro rules. Call it impl set request payload. It somehow needs to expand to something like this, right? And this guy is just a name. Name is an ident. And then we can say impl request payload for create user payload and login payload. And that does work. Nice. Did it actually compile? Set request payload is not implemented for create tweet payload. Create user. Create tweet payload. There we go. All right, that did compile. So we need to actually use the login URL on the backend. Login is so if you do a delete call, then you log out, whereas the post is the login. So this is add endpoint, login. Which means we have to implement the trait backend endpoint. For login. Get request payload. Interesting. Let's fix this first. Import login. Expected user response. Why? Because we put it there. So this is a token response. We should actually be able to say self response as API endpoint. Now we do have to fully qualify it apparently. And the payload is a login payload. And that's actually pretty neat. It is it's just extracted for us automatically by this trait and the add endpoint method. That means the password is now payload.password. Very nice. And then there was that other error, which is get request payload. I think that's basically the inverse, or sort of the backend side of the problem that we had before on the front end. And again, we have the same issue with no payload, that we can't make this implementation generic for anything that's deserialized, which is unfortunate. But we can at least make a macro for it. Impl get request payload. And that becomes create tweet and login. I was just confused. It said like 50 errors down here. That seemed like a lot. All right. By the way, if you're sort of completely unfamiliar with these kinds of macros in Rust, John has a great stream on those. If you look it up on YouTube, it's really good. So I think he did it as part of his Crust of Rust series. John, I think if you search for John Who, he'll show up. At least he does for me. He had a great stream on declarative macros. So if you're just totally new to writing these like small macros like this, that's a good place to start. I'm not a huge fan of macros in general. They can be a bit scary, but for just removing duplication of implementing this trait many times, where the literal definition is the same except for the name of a type, I think a macro is totally cool. There's a test that failed though. Logging in with invalid password. Oh yeah. So there was this guy down here. So we just have to return an empty response with the status code. But we promise to return, I think if we look at, so this handler always returns a response and a status code, which is, well, it doesn't return a response, it returns like the type that it promised together with the status code. Or an error. Do you have to return an error? I suppose so. Let's look at what the type error actually looks like. So they have a result, which is an error, new status code, and an E. You can just make one from string. I do believe that means we're gonna get a response body. I think it is. Which test was it that actually failed? Let's see. I think it was logging in with invalid password or something like that. Yeah, logging in with invalid password. Okay, that does make an assertion on the response body. So let's see if we say error. Tide error from stir foo with status code forbidden. The status code goes first. See if that passes. I don't think it will. I think it's going to show a different message instead of the something went wrong. Yeah, so it expected the error. The message was something wrong, but it got foo. We can technically just make our own function that just returns that error. Something went wrong. Returns an error. Wait, and we want to pass in the status code. Yep. I think that was all the tests that passed, or passes now. We still have the bug where sometimes when we run the tests in parallel, they hang for whatever reason. I'm not quite sure why. That's still something I have to look into. We do have an issue for it. This one. That's why you'll see the tests run like one at a time. Yeah, so that was login, like that. Let's see, let's quickly do create user as well. That doesn't take anything /users /users. It is still post. It takes a create user payload and returns a user response. And you call it in a very similar way. this payload, and the URL is create user URL. And that's the endpoint, where we have to do the similar business as before. What's even in this guy? A string, which is the token. What's in a user response? No. It's still creating a user returns a token response. That's right. And we have to implement this guy with our macro for create user payload. Like that. Now we should be able to create users again. Let's truncate the table. Sign up as Bob. There we go. That works. Let's do the same thing where we add it to the backend. I wonder why it doesn't want to import that. It is imported. It's complaining about a different thing. We have to use our macro again for create user payload. And we have to implement the backend endpoint for users create. Should be fairly similar to what we had before. Takes a create user payload. Does all this stuff. Let's just import star from shared. We're going to import basically everything otherwise. That almost compiles. Get request payload is not implemented for create user payload. Didn't we just do that? Cannot find create user payload. Let's just import all the payloads. All right. Test should still pass. Very nice. I think that was all the endpoints that were actually called from the front end. Sweet. What to do next? I've been thinking it would be neat to have sort of a more structured way that we go about loading. Nah, I was thinking that like maybe we could look at the login flow and see if there's any structure that we can pull out into a more sort of defined way. Currently, there's a bunch of things that are sort of ad hoc. These calls, they should probably be moved into the API instead of hard-coded here. Load user profile. Get user loaded. I don't think we're using any of these currently. We are using request failed. Ah, yeah, so when the app loads initially, if you're on a user profile, we load the profile of that user. That makes sense. I do think we should move these two into the API module, which means we need those two as well to actually handle when the response comes back. One small change that I'll do first, though, I'm usually afraid of these like default match whatever pattern, because if one day we add a page where we have to remember to update like this pattern match in the init function, we're gonna forget. So I usually, even though for most pages we might not want to do anything, I still like to have it explicit. And I think Rust Analyzer can actually insert all the match cases, fill match arms. Yeah. So for all these, I actually don't think that we have anything to do. Like there's no data for root login, sign up or signed in that has to be loaded. That we can just do like that. Whereas if it's a username, we do actually have to load that user. Now let's pull these into the API module. So that becomes load user. Pub async fn load user. It just does that. We currently also post a tweet, which I think we can just nuke. I think that was just for testing. So we do need the auth token. And we need the username. Let's make the auth token an option string. Because you might want to call this endpoint without an auth token. We never know. I don't think it makes sense to make it required, at least. Username is a stir. So to call it is username and model dot auth token clone. Yeah, okay, it needs to be an own string because we have to pass it across like an async boundary. And the future that perform command takes has to implement here. So the future that it takes as the command has to be static, which means it can't have references inside it. So if a future references a string slice, then the future will sort of implicitly, like you have an implicit lifetime here, right? And then the future that's returned by this async function will be tied to this a lifetime, which means it won't be static. So it can have references inside it. But that's actually fine because you do have a static username here already. So that works. Let's see, we do actually load the profile. That's great. I just want to see. So the user profile has a username inside it. When we load the page, we send a message to also load the data. Like, I think this should definitely be. I'm wondering, this .go thing, I don't think that works at the moment. Because if we were to go to a page that has to have data loaded, then that data would not get loaded. So I think our API for like visiting pages have to change. I think we're going to have to pass in the orders as well. So let's see, what type is orders? So I think Go is going to have to take orders as well, like that. And then we get the URL, we change the URL, we set the current page, and then we load the data for the page. Load data for page. Questions, what do we want to do in init? In init, the page. We make the model on the page. Do we then want to call? You don't want to call Go on that page, because that would like push the same URL onto the history state thing, which we don't want to do. We kind of only want to do this. So we almost want that in a separate function. Load data. That takes the orders. That doesn't work at all. We need to pass in orders. There. All right, so the problem here was that we're moving self into model.page, and then it's gone, and then we're using it immediately afterwards. But we can just load the data first and then assign it onto the model. That the order shouldn't matter. I don't think we've broken anything. I do also think we should make this function a method on the page. Let's say infiltrate from URL for page. And then page becomes page from. All right, things are still working. And if we log out and we log in again, we got assigned in. Sweet, we didn't break anything. Let's see. You subscribe to the changes, load the data for the page. Build the model. If there's an auth token, we load the current user. Sweet. Let's just clean this up a bit. I wish Cargo was able to, Cargo or Rust format was able to remove unused imports. That would be really great. All right, so what do we want to do next? We could think about error handling. So let's see, if you try to log in as someone who doesn't exist, one password shows up, and currently there's nothing shown in the UI. We do get a request failed though. Where does that come from? 158. Right, so who sends that? Alright, so when fetch fails, it sends the request failed message. That makes sense. I've been thinking about something that I think would be nice. So I've done a lot of web development in Ruby on Rails, and there you have a concept called the flash, which is basically a message that you can show on the page, and then when the page reloads, that message automatically goes away. And there's two kinds of flash messages. There's a notice, which is for like general messages. Usually you'd use it when a request was successfully submitted. And then there's an error variant, and you can sort of set both, and they automatically go away when people leave the page. And I was thinking it would be nice to have a similar thing for errors. So I think we could actually set that up, like have some message that gets sent when an error is generated, and the model automatically updates itself. And then the next time it receives an update, then it automatically clears the message if it's there. Or maybe it sets a timer to remove the message after a certain amount of time. So let's do that. So this one, request failed, gets a fetch error. What the hell is that? Fetch error. A whole bunch of things. It implements debug, not display. That is great. I guess we could just like turn it into a like some sort of generic request failed message, whatever. So let's think, what do we want on our model? Let's say maybe we had, let's have a mod flash. Flash. That's probably, what is flash? Is it an enum? I'm thinking that we have some type where we can say like dot set error or set notice, and then we have another one where we can say like dot clear, which kind of means that this thing, like if it's an option, then adding our own methods to it is sort of annoying. So that's like, that tells me that we probably just want a type called flash that then has some internal storage. So let's say we have a struct flash, which has a message, and then a message is either a notice or an error, and the message is optional. And let's just implement default. Then down here we can say flash is default, which will make it, we cannot, can we derive default? We just have to import it, that's why. Yeah, so then it'll default to this guy being none, which is what we want. Impl flash, let's say pub fn set notice. Mute self notice is a stir. Self message is some. Message notice to string. And we have a similar one for the error. And we have clear. And we probably also have a get. So I do think we have to say .asRef, because by default map takes ownership. So if we just say self.message.map, that means we take ownership, or we rather remove the option out of self.message, which we can't do from a borrowed self. So if you say .asref, it basically turns it basically borrows the option and sort of makes it a reference of the inner type, if that makes sense. But we're still, do we have to say as stir here? Yeah. Can we borrow here as well? Does that do the same thing? No. I think there is some subtle things with regards to pattern matching and strings, where like most times when you borrow a string, it automatically becomes a stir, or can become if that's what the method you're passing it into expects. I don't think it always works in pattern matching. I've experienced a couple of times where you have to say .asref. I wonder, I'm not sure, but there is as I believe there's as dref as well. I don't think that would work. Option as dref. We just have to spell it. Wait, no. As dref. Alright, whatever. As ref, as stir, like that. So now we should be able to say model.flash.setError. The error is simply let's just say request failed. And then we need to show the flash. Probably want to do that in view. Let's do it above the navigation. If wait. This API doesn't work, right? Because we need to know if it is a successful message, if it's a notice, or if it's an error. So this one needs to return message. It should just be that. I think. Yeah. All right, so if we can say if let sum, now let's just say match model.flashGet. If it's a none, then I don't know, return just an empty div. Otherwise, that is a message. That's a message error or a notice. We're just gonna make this flash message. just so it doesn't collide with the top level message definition that we have. Import it. So if there is an error, we just want to say error message. Wait, this is a notice. And so when do we unset it? It should almost be that getting the message will clear it. The problem is that you cannot, like, we almost want to clear it after calling view if there is a flash. But we cannot do that because view only gets a reference to the model, not a mutable reference. We could, after having called update, we could just set a timer. Or I suppose that we could add, as the first thing of any message, of handling any message, if there is a flash, we remove it. Is that overkill? Is there an easier way to do it? Because there's going to be a lot of messages going back and forth. So if you have to check the flash every time, there might also be messages that aren't related to where, like, there's a message that returns, but you don't want the error to go away. I actually think the timer is probably the easiest way to go. So when we set an error in the flash, how do we set a timer? I believe there is timeout. Set timeout. Some function set interval. Problem is, it just takes a function. I don't believe if we wanted to. Yeah, so this will set interval, set timeout. So that'll call this function after this many milliseconds, if I remember my JavaScript correctly. But I don't think so. What we would want to do is remove, like, we would want to do mutate stuff. So we'd want to remove the flash from the model and probably, like, re-render somehow, which I think will require immutable access to the model, but I'm not sure that we can get that from just an fn. I think it would have to be an fn mute, because it would have to, in the closure of this function, you would have to have a reference, a mutable reference to the model. At least I think so. I wonder, is there a thing on orders to, like, send a message in some amount of time? Notify. Nah. beam. Perform command. Ah, there is a timeout. All right. This seems like exactly the kind of thing that we want. So send some clear flash message in 2 seconds. Nice. So when you set it, let's just try this. So this is that one. Clear flash. Model flash clear. I think we'd want to package this up together somehow. But I do think this should work. Let's test it out. The error is shown and goes away after 2 seconds. Nice. Let's say 5 seconds. The question is, where do we want to put it? We could put it here, then you would have to pass in the orders every time. I kind of think that's fine. When would you ever want to set the flash without ever registering for it to be removed? Probably never. Like that. So this should be fn set clearing timer. Doesn't need the error. Like that. Cool. Right, so this works for a request failed. I'm wondering if we should have a special, like a general sort of error message that we can send. I do think that would be neat. Because otherwise we're going to have to duplicate stuff like this in a whole bunch of places. So let's say that instead of having request failed, we have a general error thing. And that can be request failed. And so this is error with an error. And then we say match error. Here we do that. It's error. What was error? Yeah, that's some C thing that we imported. All right, I think we have to update the API module. And it needs to be public. Very nice. Everything should still work the way it did before. And it does, and the error goes away after 5 seconds. That seems about 5 seconds. Sweet. I think we're making pretty good progress. I haven't made apps like this before with this sort of message passing style. I wonder if it's going to be sort of super hairy down the line, or if you need to like break it up more and have like separate enums for messages. So like you would have a request responded message, and that contains an enum which tells you exactly which request, because like we're gonna end up with like one of these for each endpoint. So this enum is going to be huge over time. I'm a bit reluctant to make that change up front. I'd rather wait and see if it actually becomes a problem and then do it at that point. All right. So I think the next thing that we should do is probably loading the timeline, because when we have that, then we can do post tweets, and then we can actually see the tweets appear in our timeline. And then we need follows and maybe some sort of like thing where you can search for other users. Yeah. So we do have error handling here. I think we had a couple of unwraps in the front end. I'm curious, like these things, should they be handled through our generic error thing, or should they be handled, or should they just be unwrapped? Because currently, like we don't show anything in the UI when this happens. And it's not like we can recover from it anyway. I kind of want to leave the unwraps because I don't really feel like we get a whole lot of information. And it's not like the user can do anything. I guess the same goes for this request fail thing. I suppose the user could retry. But like if this form is not set up correctly, a retry is not going to do anything. I actually think I'm going to leave these unwraps for now. Especially the storage ones. Like if those fail, you're just totally fucked up. So what is that unwrap train in con? So this is in a test. And it looks like, I suppose you're referencing these lines here. Maybe not. So I think that's just a bunch of calls that can fail, and then we're just unwrapping those, which is fine in tests, of course. Yeah, so I actually think error handling is sort of set up and working. I think we're gonna move that. Going to login while logged in should send you somewhere else. Let's get to that later. Let's look at the timeline now. We should probably commit. It's been a while. What did we do? We didn't really do, like, it was mostly sort of error handling and like session stuff almost. Remember the logged in user and some error handling. All right, let's see. What is the endpoint to get the timeline? Me timeline. Let's just convert that to this style as well. Timeline. Timeline URL. Me timeline. It's a get. I don't believe it takes any payload. Nope. And it responds with tweets. It responds with a vector of tweets. Yeah, so tweets up here is a vector, right? Yeah, a vector of tweet response. All right, that's fun. That's our first route that actually returns a vector of something. Tweet response. It does compile. That's a good sign. So this should be timeline. And then if we go here, that was only for payloads. Timeline. Where did we implement that anyway? We did it in me. Let's put that there as well. Nice, that just worked. Cool. I suppose that is because, so backend API endpoint. I'm just wondering, like, why did this vec business work just out of the box? I think it's add endpoint. If we look at the actual definition of API, yeah. So the definition of API endpoint requires that the response is serialized and deserialized owned, which a vec of something that is serialized is also serialized itself. So that's why it works. That's pretty cool. I think it actually worked. Let's just run the test. And then we're going to have to add it on the front end as well. shared lib, frontend API, function like this, load timeline, does need the auth token, calls timeline with the auth token and timeline URL, no payload, and the message is load timeline endpoint responded, and it returns a vec of tweet response, I think. All right. So when you're logged in, we want the home page to show your timeline. So view does view page. If you're on root, we just say welcome. Let's say if model dot logged in cool. How do we know if you're logged in? We know you're logged in if there is an auth token. Self auth token is some. So if you're logged in, then we show the timeline with the model. I think we need a separate, we almost need a separate page for it, right? We need a root for when you're logged in and a root for when you're logged in. Because currently we don't have any way of threading the tweets into the actual timeline view. Yeah. So let's say we have a root logged out, and then we're going to add a timeline. But let's just get this to compile first. Root logged out. That means we don't need any of this business anymore. I don't know if this would actually work. I think so, but we'll see. Root logged out. This kind of sucks. At this point, we need to know the URL as well, because to create the page from a URL, there's two URLs that have the same page. There's one URL, just slash, that have two different pages, the timeline, which is sort of annoying. That probably means we need to thread the model in here, because we need to know if they're actually logged in to create the page. And same thing here. We'll get a compiler for that later. Root logged out. What doesn't compile? View doesn't compile. So here we need to say this needs to return the timeline, right? Whereas this one shows that you're logged out. So let's say that we add the timeline here. It takes a vec of tweets. I'm not sure how this works with pagination, which I do believe we have on the timeline. Yeah, the timeline is paginated, which I think will require binding to scroll or something like that. I have no clue how to do that with some infinite scrolling thing. Loading for the timeline. This assumes that the tweets are already there, right? Like you could just initiate the timeline page with an empty list of tweets. Like you could say, or you could say it's an option. I don't know if option is the right thing to use here. I wonder if having some sort of like loaded, not loaded thing. Page data. Loaded, not loaded. Because currently this is just a username, but that's kind of cheating because we get that directly from the URL. This almost like this will eventually be an entire user response thing. So this will be, we ignore that and then we say we want to send a load timeline. Message. And that'll do this business. Load timeline. That'll respond with timeline loaded. Then we say match model.page if let sum no, if the page is a page timeline. I wonder if you can do this. Data then data is page data loaded tweets. So if we finish loading the timeline and you're on the timeline page, then we update the page. I guess that makes sense. So load timeline, just a typo. So when you load the data for a page, if you're on the timeline, this almost doesn't matter if the data is loaded or not. This is almost more like this is sort of a load or reload kind of thing. This is timeline. Timeline is also slash for now. And let's see, how do we handle the timeline here? Because we kind of want to do this. So the way this function works currently is it gets a URL and then it breaks it on slashes and converts that into a like array slice kind of thing. And then we match on it. So if it's a single element array where the first item is the string signup, then you're on the signup page. And this is how we're able to say that if the first part of the array is users, then the second part, and there's two parts, then just bind the second part to a variable called username. So that's how we're sort of able to match into the URL. You could also do that with a regular expression. There's many different ways to do it. It kind of sucks when you're in this situation though, because you cannot have overlapping patterns in this way. I'm actually surprised this is not an error by default, but just a warning. We need the model as well here, because we need to know if you're logged in. Because if you're logged in, then slash goes to the timeline. If you're not logged in, it goes to the root. And you cannot pass two things into from. So I kind of think we have to make our own method from a URL and a model. Here we sort of have a chicken and the egg kind of problem, right? We need to make the model. We need to make the page so that we can construct the model. And the other way around. All right, why did we need the model in from? We needed to know if you're logged in. I think we're gonna have to do some slightly nasty business here. So let's say that by default you're on page root locked out. Then we can make the page from the URL and the model. Load the data for the page and then set it to be the actual page. So this is just sort of a dummy value, if you will, which I think should work. So now, if you're on the root, if model locked logged in. If you're logged in, you get the timeline. If you're logged out, get the root. And here we have to handle the page timeline tweets. Timeline model tweets. So this actually takes a page data. Right, and then we can show a loading state. Match tweets page data not loaded. Loading. All right, I think it actually compiles now. Let's see if it works. I have no clue if it's going to work. We can log in still. That works. We're on signed in. You should probably just go straight to the timeline. We should probably just nuke this signed in page kind of thing. Home. This is loading. So we're never actually sending the event to load the data. Or the data came back and we don't actually assign it. Would it be an idea to log all messages? I wonder if that is just like way too much spam. So the timeline is loaded. When you revisit the page, but if you like just click on home, nothing happens. Where is the home link? That triggers this one, which sets the page but doesn't actually load its data. I don't think we can use. So here in other cases we would say page.go with the model and the orders, but that doesn't work because then we push the route twice. So you navigate to the route by clicking on the link, and we would push it again, which we don't want to do. So we almost just want to call load data and assign the page to the model. We kind of just want to do that. Yeah. All right. It feels a bit wrong that like this code and this code is basically duplicated, right? Is that a problem? I don't think so, but I'm not sure. This also needs to be timeline. I'm gonna leave this set up for now because I'm not quite sure if it's bad or not, so let's see how it goes. Did we have any more to-dos? Nope. All right. So now we have to, let's just show the number of tweets in the timeline. Got tweets len tweets. Got 0 tweets. Cool. Then we need a like a post tweet kind of thing. Page post tweet. I don't think post tweet has any data because it's just going to show a form. URL is tweet new. How did the forms work? Like that. We also need a new form to it. Post tweet form. Text input. And we need a post tweet form submitted event. Message rather. We need the form. I'm a bit worried about getting like tons of forms on the model over time. Post tweet form. Post tweet form. And it needs a text input. Let's not handle the message for now. Actually, let's just leave that as a to-do. That's the only thing missing. So what do we do when the post tweet is done? Then we have to do stuff in the API client. Did we have... yes, we already have the shared endpoint for posting a tweet. We just need a function that wraps it. Post tweet. Auth token. Post tweet URL. It takes a create tweet payload, which I believe takes text. And it responds with post tweet endpoint responded. And we need that message. Takes a tweet response. Nice. Then let's show a flash that the tweet was successfully posted. Set notice. Tweet posted. I'm not sure that we need the response. Should we send you to a page that shows that individual tweet, or should we send you to the timeline? Let's just go to the timeline. Want the enums to be very bloated if you have lots of different forms at the end? Yeah, most likely. I kind of want to see how things evolve organically, and then when we can see a pattern of like we do this a lot, then we can invent some infrastructures to make that easier. But I definitely think you're right that we're gonna have tons of forms on the model, and we're probably also gonna have lots of these like pairs or triples of message types related to actually submitting a form, where you have like that a form was submitted and that the corresponding endpoint was responded. I'm not quite sure how we're gonna handle that, but I think we will eventually build some structure to make that easier to work with. Not quite sure. I haven't looked at any like larger apps built with C to get an idea of how they do it. I just kind of want to figure things out on my own, mostly because it's fun. So the tweet is posted. Let's say you just go to the timeline. How do we do that? Page, timeline, page data, not loaded, go, model orders. And it should, the timeline should automatically reload itself, I believe. Post tweet. How did we get the input? Form is model dot Post tweet form. Like also currently there's no like static type safety thing that ties this post tweet form submitted message together with the post tweet form. So you can technically have the message without having the corresponding form on the model, or having it registered and those kinds of things. I would like to avoid that. So like setting up a form, all you do is you add stuff in the view, and then you follow the compiler messages. And then when all the compiler messages are done, everything works. Like at this point, everything compiles, but our app doesn't work because we don't actually handle submitting the form. So stuff like that, I would like to figure out a system to avoid. This is the actual form is text input, get unwrap value, post tweet, takes the auth token and the text. All right. I think that is all. There's 0 tweets in the timeline. We can post a tweet, which explodes. Unknown URL, tweet new. Yeah, this is annoying. We have to find a way to handle this more gracefully. So if you go to tweets, new, then the page is post tweet. That works. Post a tweet with yo. Notice shows it came back from the timeline. Let's just look at the network. It calls timeline twice. That's curious. We're gonna want to look into that. Make sure we don't call the endpoints twice when loading a page How do you like that chair? That's the IKEA chair, right? Yes, I don't remember what it's called, but you're right. It's from IKEA. I think it's totally fine. I have no issues with it. I've never tried any of those like super fancy, like Herman Miller whatever chairs that cost several $1,000s. I would like to, but so far this chair is fine for me. All right, so we need to actually show the tweets in the timeline. I have one at the office, but I don't have a grant for it. Is it nice? Like, which chair do you have? Because I've considered like going to a showroom or something to actually check the chair out. But I'm also like, it's a lot of money to spend on a chair, so I almost want to rent it first to see if I like it. I'm not sure if you can buy it and then sit on it for a month and then return it because you don't like it. Herman Miller Aeron chair, yeah, that's the one that most people have. I've seen reviews of it and like videos of people assembling it and stuff. Do you like Jysk or IKEA better? So for the people who aren't Danish, Jysk is basically sort of a Danish version of IKEA. I have no preference one over the other. I got a Herman Miller Aeron about 6 years ago. It was expensive, but I use it every day, multiple hours, so I think it's worth it. Yeah, I agree. I think most people sort of underestimate the value that you get from spending a bit more money like on tools that you use every day. So it does make sense to shell out a lot of money for a nice chair because you sit in it all the time. It's almost like getting a nice bed because like a third of your life you spend in bed or whatever. I'm Canadian. Jysk is big here. Whoa, I did not know it was an international thing. I thought it was Danish only. That's crazy. Yeah, you don't have it in Texas. Spending money on a chair and mash is worth it. Yeah, I agree. I listened to a bunch of podcasts, and like half of them are sponsored by Casper, that mattress company. But I would not want to order a mattress online, at least not to have it shipped all the way here. And then if I don't like it, I have to return it, and that's a huge pain in the ass. I don't even know if they deliver to Denmark. All right. Where were we? Oh yes, showing the timeline. Going to invest in a standing desk and a nice chair. Our company is going full remote from now on. Yeah, I've had standing desks at work for many years. I think it's required by law in Denmark that your desks at offices have to be adjustable in height. I don't think it's a requirement that it has to be like automatic with a button, but just that you have to be able to adjust them somehow. But most places I've worked have had like the sort of motorized chair tables that can go up and down with a button. And I honestly don't stand a whole lot. I find that it disrupts my thinking. I'm almost like I don't code as well when I'm standing. I don't know if that's weird or not. Oh yeah, it's in the view timeline. We almost want a thing that just shows a tweet. Yeah, you can really mesh up your posture and shoulder without having a desk at the right height. Yes, I find that having like your monitor and your desk at the right height is really nice. That was a huge difference when I realized that some years ago, when I like pulled the monitor up higher and the desk further down. That made a huge difference. And thanks, I'm happy that you're enjoying the stream. I'm honestly having a lot of fun doing this front-end WASM stuff. I haven't done front-end in years, and not in this sort of style at all. So I honestly think it's a lot of fun. I encourage people to check it out if you're into this sort of stuff. And I mean, you're welcome to pull down my code and tear it apart and submit pull requests and do whatever. So this is a list of tweet responses. So we should be able to say tweet iter map tweet. I wonder if you can make a node out of a list. If you can put tweets. Tweet views. Can you just return that directly? It has to somehow be turned into a node, right? Seed nodes. Converts vec node and returned flattened vec. Items have to implement the trait into nodes. Is that the one we want? No, vec. So they mentioned a trait called into nodes. takes a thing and gives us a vec of nodes, which is already what we have. So how do we turn a vec of node into a single node? Into nodes, node. Element. Because most places previously we sort of define outright how many elements are in the nodes. We don't have anywhere where we like take a list of nodes and just return that. Where's C? Add a class. Data. G. Great documentation. Create shortcut macros for any element. Populate these functions in this module. Whoa. Wait, is this the wrong one? Oh my god, they have a macro that they use to define another macro. Element SVG. G is probably some SVG thing. I'm just looking through this to see if there's anything that sort of catches my eye. Converts items to node and returns flattened. Like, you cannot do this, right? No, that gives the same error. Nodes. Interesting. Virtual DOM node. Node contains an EL. Seems weird that we would have to create these manually. Vec. Do they have an EL macro? Not directly. Seed element without docs. Generated from this guy. Maybe in seed helpers. I guess not. Let's look at their website. They do have an example where they show how to make to-do MVC, which probably means they have a list of to-dos that they somehow render. View. If vec. Can you return? Can we just make this a vec? I just kind of want to see if this compiles at all without updating each of the other branches. That totally works. It does compile. All right, so you don't have to, like, your view function can return. Let's see, what do we actually call? Update view. Yeah, so I think your outermost view function, if we look at start, what does it look like? App start takes a view, that's a view function, returns inodes, which is a generic thing. Inodes. Inodes has to implement into nodes. Yeah, that makes sense. So from your view function, you can return anything that implements into nodes. And that's implemented for a single node and a vector of nodes. Which means that we can change our view function up here to be a vec. And then we can change this guy to be nodes that we saw before, which would sort of flatten it. So that means each of these can return a list if they want to, or not a list. They don't have to. And so this view page thing can return a list, I think. Although I kind of don't think it's necessary, because we probably don't want to return a list from this timeline anyway. We could probably wrap it in a div, which we will probably want to do eventually for styling purposes. So we can probably say div tweet views like that. And then say this is a single one and that's a single one. That works as well. Div. Let's actually just keep the outermost one as a vec. I think that's fine. All right, that works as well. So it turns out that you can actually embed a vector directly in a node, or you can just return the vector. Sweet. So how do you render a single div or a single tweet? What is even on a tweet? ID and text. All right, there's the tweet. If we try to post another one, there we go, they both show up. Are you using Cargo Watch for compile and save? So I downloaded seed GitHub template, I think. Yeah, I think I used this quick start thing. I'm not sure if it was this one. Definitely not that one. And it came, like, whatever quick start thing I ended up using came with a bunch of scripts, and one of them was to start a cargo watch thing to build and run the server. So I just adapted it into this small script. So you can say bin frontend build and dash watch, and then it'll do cargo watch. If you don't say dash watch, it'll just use wasm pack to do it once. So yes, it is cargo watch. I don't use webpack as far as I'm aware. I don't know if wasm pack uses that under the hood or if it's something else. I'm not sure. It works. So we did get the 2 tweets working. Oh, that was weird. It didn't work. Like, there was an error. I didn't see what it was though. We probably want some separation between them, and probably also the username, which means that our tweet response need to include the user who posted the tweet. Let's just go ahead and add like horizontal rulers between each of them. That means that we're also going to get one underneath the last one, which is sort of weird. I guess you could do that by changing the map to be the one that adds the horizontal rule. But if we were to do this for real, we'd probably just add the spacing with CSS and then hide the spacing on the very last one or something like that. I think that's fine for now. Let's think about how we actually get the username in there. I think we have to change the tweet response to also include the user. Otherwise, you would have to include the user ID and then for each tweet, like do a query to the API to load the user for that particular tweet, which is probably inefficient. So let's say that it includes a user. And now a whole bunch of things should fail to compile, at least in the backend. Yeah, before we add it, I think we should actually have a test for it first. Posting tweets. Tweet is too long. Timeline. Let's copy this one and make one that is response includes user who posted tweet. Post tweet, what does that do? All right, that just calls the endpoint and creates the tweet. Load the timeline. That test should pass because we didn't really change it a whole lot. And it does. Let's say that besides the text, we also want the user. Username should be Bob. Create user and authenticate. Takes the username. So now the test should fail, saying that it didn't get a user. And it does. Data 0 user is missing. Then if we add it to tweet response, like that, it fails in endpoints me. All right. So currently we're doing a union of tweets that user 1 that the current user posted and tweets posted by users that you're following. So I don't think that, so this query as macro will basically take each field of our query and assign it to fields in the struct that we specify here with the same names. I don't think it works for like nested structs in this way. I kind of think we have to do that and then map it manually. We have to import query from SQLX. And then let's say these are tweets. Tweets. And then we want to inner join users on users ID is tweets user ID. Tweets user ID doesn't exist. Like that. Has tweet ID. And for the user response, we need ID and username. User's username as user username. I don't know if this is going to be a pain in the ass to actually map the data. Let's find out. So tweets should be an iterator kind of thing. And it is. Share responses. So it needs to become a tweet response. ID tweet dot tweet ID. Like that. Missing the user. ID is tweet user ID, username, why are these optional? Interesting. I wonder if that's because there's a bug in our query that Because like these would not normally be nullable. Right? At least I don't think so. Expected string found UUID. Username. I think we should actually be able to return that. Yep. Endpoints tweets. This one has the same problem. When you post a tweet, does it make sense to get the user back? The user will be you. I wonder if this will, if that will make it annoying for the front end. Let's not include the user for now and say this is a post tweet response. Responses. Imported. And so we promise that post tweet returns tweet response, but in fact it now returns post tweet response. What? Cannot find associated type response in API. That's because it's API endpoint, not API response. That's a different trait. There we go. That should make the front end break. Yes. See, this is why we did the sort of, like now the fact that we have type safe boundary between the front end and the back end is paying off, because we made a change on the back end to an endpoint and the front end is broken until we apply the change there as well. Now things work again. And I think everything should pass now. We really should remove all those unused endpoints, or unused imports rather. So that test passes. Let's just see if all the tests pass. I don't see why they wouldn't. I'm just gonna go fill up my water bottle. I'll be back in like 2 seconds. I do have a fancy break script. I believe the tests all passed. Yep. And we should be able to update our view to show tweet username. Request failed. What request failed? Missing field user. Saturday error. We haven't restarted the backend. Huh. I don't think we can protect ourselves against that. Because you can see this is the response from the timeline, and the user is not here. There we go, that works. Cool. Should we have like when the tweet was posted as well? Because we don't have that currently. Let's try to make this link, like the username, a link that goes to that user's profile. How do we do links again? Hello. How's it going? Did you just finish streaming, or I feel like you're streaming all the time? If you click on the username, you go to page, user profile for tweet user username to string. Like that. This is so cool. Thanks for the host. I appreciate it. What else? The timestamp. How would we make that test? Because we have to somehow like provide the text in the assertion, which is annoying. Like we almost want to freeze time, which I don't know if that is possible. I mean, we could build a thing that allowed us to freeze time. Do we have chrono? Yes, we do. I'm thinking, like, if we wanted to build a thing that allowed us to freeze time in tests, then we would have to change, like, we have to go through one central place to actually get the time. And that one place has to be a place that we control. Currently, if we wanted to get the current time, chrono, I believe there is like UTC now or something like that. Yeah, so that gives the current time. But we cannot, like, if we wanted to have a method that like took some time and a closure, and then it would freeze the time to be that time that you provided within the closure. Like, we have to be able to set that time somewhere. It has to be a location that we control. And we don't really control UTC now on chrono. Wonder if chrono has a way to lock time. Probably not. Rust, chrono, freeze time. No. So in the Ruby world, there's a library called timecop, which basically mocks any sort of built-in way of getting the time in Ruby, which you can very easily do, but you can't exactly do that in Rust. So if we were to build our own thing, we'd have to somehow store the current time that's being used, and we'd probably have to use a mutex, which would mean that every time you ask for the current time, you'd have to wait on that mutex. To be fair, getting the current time is very fast, so I don't think there'd be a lot of contention on that mutex. I kind of think that's what we have to do, because we're going to end up having to test stuff that deals with time anyway, so we might as well do that now. Tokyo has a time instant too. Like a clock kind of thing? We're not using Tokyo, we're using async standard. Time instant. Yeah, I think this is meant to be sort of like the instant type that's in the standard library, which is just measure like a point in time and then allow you to say how long time has it been since this time. What we actually want is like a physical date time zone kind of thing, which is not really what this is. Yeah, you can use assembly, yeah, probably. All right, I think we have to build our own clock kind of thing. Where do we want to put it? Clock rs mod clock. So we make some time instance. Let's just do this. You're doing a bunch of them. I'm not sure what you mean. And then I would like to say freeze time to this time within this closure. And then if you say assert equals current time, I'm thinking, where do we, when we post the tweet, how do we set the created at? Ah, okay, we are actually getting, I was wondering if we somehow set it through like a trigger in the database or something that would be hard to mock. Are you asking the system for the time a lot? No, I don't think so. Use, I believe there's chrono prelude. Yeah. So if you get the current time, then that should be equal to that time. Whereas if you're outside, they should not be equal. And they do actually implement EQ, that's great. So you need a function freeze time that takes a time, which is a date time UTC, and it takes an f, fn mute maybe, I'm not sure, returns a t, fn current time, like that. So this one, the current time should be, do we have lazy static? Yes, we do. I can never remember how to use it. Lazy static. We need to be able to lock time multiple times and probably also nested within each other. I'm not quite sure. Let's just focus on getting this test to pass, and then we can make it more advanced. So this is a mutex date time UTC. Frozen time. It probably needs to be an option in case time is not frozen. Mutex new none. I suppose this has to be an async mutex. This means this is an async function, this is an async function, as is this. Freeze time await, current time await, current time await. So getting the current time does freeze time lock. If let sum That's a await. Which is a mutex guard for something that is clone. Can you dereference that? Well, something that is copy. Which you can. Nice. That works. Yeah, so the inner thing, this returns an impl future, where this returns an f, and then we return f output, where f is a future. Type inside async block. Well, T is unit, right? God damn it. Let's see, we have an F, and we have a fut. Where fut is a future, and F is a function that returns a fut. What's that? Rust Analyzer was complaining about a syntax. I'm not quite sure what that was. Wrong number of type arguments. I wonder if we can just remove them. Nope. That kind of sucks that you need to put the type there. All right. I don't think we'd be calling this function inside of tests anyway. All right, let's just make sure there still fails. Line 11. Okay, so how do we actually do that? Let's do the easiest thing and just say f.await. And that should fail that the times are not the same. Yeah. So we have to set it equal to sum of the time, and then call it, and then set it back to none. That works. Wonder if we should be locking twice. Yeah, because otherwise we'd probably deadlock in that the current time requires the lock. I wonder if it fails to compile actually. It is an option. Because we're dereferencing it there. Cat bar lock is mutable. It does work. Does it deadlock? Yeah, it does. Alright, so Rust can't unfortunately protect you against all deadlocks. This was the version that worked, right? Cool. So before we expand on this one, let's just see if it actually works for our like the use case that we had before, which was in whatever test where we posted the tweets. No, it was actually in the timeline. Test timeline. We want the created at here. Time. So we make the time be, doesn't really matter. We can just make a UTC now. Actually, to be very sure, let's set it to this time from a long time ago. And then if we say freeze time to be this one. This one needs to be pub. God damn it, same thing again. Yeah, it moves. So that closure takes references to the server. Change this to accept FM mute instead of F. Because it takes, why does post tweet need a mutable server? Because send needs a mutable server. Why does that need a mutable server? Simulate. This one does not need a mutable thing here. Yeah. Turns out we didn't need a mutable server at all. Nice. I do wonder if this could be f in mute. And then we have to make it mutable to be able to call it. Seems like we could. So usually when you can make the closure f in mute, you should do that, because that gives your callers more power, basically. Unless, like, for some reason that's not how your API should work. And let's run the write test. Wait, in the API where we're actually posting tweets here, we now have to say this is let now is create clock current time await. Why does that deadlock? That works. It didn't deadlock, it was just slow. All right. So the data don't get returned. That's because we need to update shared payloads, shared responses. I wonder if you can put a chrono UTC thing within a WASM library. Seems like you can. All right. Use chrono prelude. And so a tweet response also has a created at, which is a date time UTC. And we just have to bring in enable Saturday for chrono. Great, that totally worked. And endpoint me. Would you look at that? It actually worked. So if we didn't freeze the time, it should fail. Sometimes running one test hangs as well. It's not just the entire suite. And it does fail. That's pretty cool. There's a couple of other places where we're getting the time the old way. That should be great. Clock. Current time await. Nice. And I think freeze time should be CFG test, so it's only compiled for test mode. Pretty cool. Now, we don't support nesting freeze time within itself. I kind of think that's fine. We could throw up a warning saying that that time is not frozen. Like when you freeze time, we assert that time is not already frozen. Which we should probably have a test for. Cannot nest freezing time. If we put that one within itself, should panic. Fails because it didn't panic. We add the assert. And it works. Nice. So if we eventually end up needing this behavior, at least we'll be aware that it isn't implemented at the moment. And then we can fix this assert and make it more advanced if we want to. I suppose you could have some sort of like a list of frozen times, and then each time you freeze the time, you add a new entry to that list. And then when you get the current time, you get like the last frozen time in that one. And whenever you leave freeze time, you remove the last element from that list. I think that would work. But I don't think we need to spend time on it now, since it isn't necessary for our use case yet. We should be able to show the current time here, though. I think we have to bring in chrono to the front end as well, maybe? Let's see. Where we show an individual tweet, we show the text, then a break, then tweet created at. And restart the backend. And there the timestamps are. Very nice. They're not formatted very well. We could probably make that a little bit nicer. format with items. Delayed format. Nah, I kind of just want to leave it like this, and then we can think about formatting it later. Yeah, I think actually that's going to be it for today. I think we've made pretty good progress. I mean, we sort of have a working Twitter clone, right? The only thing that we're really missing is the ability to go to other users' profile and follow them. I think that's it, actually. Yeah, then we have to think about what we're going to do afterwards. But unless there's any questions, I think we're actually going to end the stream here. I will just look at these to-dos that I put up and probably make them into proper issues. Going to /login while logged in should send you somewhere else. I think that makes sense on its own. Make sure you don't call the endpoints twice when loading a page. When endpoints called twice on start. When visiting a page from a call start, the endpoint corresponding to that page is called twice. We should only call it once. Right. And let's commit. What the hell did we do? We did a lot of stuff. Mainly like showing the timeline, right? While posting tweets and the timeline. Yeah, very nice. I think this was quite a productive stream. Yeah, so that's going to be it for today. I'm gonna upload the video to YouTube, so if you missed anything or you want to rewatch a previous stream, you're free to do that. Follow me on Twitter for announcements of the next stream. You can also just follow me here and you should get push notifications from Twitch. Yeah, otherwise, thanks to the people who've been talking in chat, and thank you for watching. And I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye.